John McMullen, 97.3 ESPN.com. John, if I was to ask you to give me one under-the-radar Eagle who could affect the season being a success or not, give me a couple guys that would be on that list for you.
Well, in Philadelphia, is anybody under the radar?
For instance, my guy was Jalen Mills.
Yeah, my guy right off the bat, unquestionably, is Jalen Mills. Number one. That's your number one cornerback. And you could either embrace that or acknowledge the reality of that's scary. But that's your number one cornerback on an NFL team, and a guy who's going to be asked to, at times, maybe even shadow the great receivers of the world. So I think the conversation starts with Jalen Mills, and number two, whoever you want to acknowledge that might be, is way, way down the list. I mean, Jalen Mills almost has to hit and has to improve and has to be a solid player for everything to fit together defensively.
Yeah, it's almost because, John, do they feel like, hey, we found a guy, like we outsmarted guys? Like it's like they feel like they got something with him that other teams missed on.
Yeah, I mean, they like him. I don't think there's any question. I don't know if it's that as much as he's the best of what they have, and they kind of, as I said, embrace that and realize he's probably better than the outside world thinks. But as a whole, you know, I still believe that this team, 2 years from now, when we're speaking, hopefully we're speaking, they assume that Sidney Jones and Rasul Douglas are going to be the guys, and maybe Jalen is the slot player. So it's not like they assume he's going to become Richard Sherman. It's that they know he's the best cornerback on the team right now, and they think he's a heck of a lot better than most other people outside the city believe.
Yeah, it's been an area. We talked about this, John, in the couple earlier. It's been an area on this team really since, I guess, Asante Samuel left, that they have tried and tried and tried and failed. I mean, they had Samuel. I know he wasn't well liked here, but he was pretty good. They had that weird year where they had him and Dominic Rodgers-Cromartie and Osawa, and that failed. Then they went and got Kerry Williams and Bradley Fletcher, and that failed. They went out and got Leotis McKelvin, and that failed. They went out and got Byron Maxwell, and that failed.
Yeah, that's not a great list. And they've tried, so you can't say they haven't tried to address the position. But it hasn't worked out, and it kind of speaks to just how difficult it is to play cornerback at the NFL level, because there's a lot of other things that come into play, the pass rush, the safety play, and things of that nature, whereas you can look really, really good in Seattle like Byron Maxwell when Richard Sherman is playing with you and Earl Thomas and Cam Chancellor in that great pass rush, and you don't look so good when you're asked to be a lockdown cornerback in another city that didn't have those things. I think from the Eagles' perspective, they now believe that they have a solid defensive line, a solid front. They believe they have good safeties, and that's going to help Jalen Mills and maybe mask some of the deficiencies that he has. And not only him, of also Patrick Robinson and Rasul Douglas as a rookie. They hope that everything comes together and the sum is sort of greater than the parts, and we'll see how it shakes out. But there's no doubt about it. If you look at that defense on paper, it's really, really good, except for the cornerback position. So if Jalen Mills does end up being better than everyone expects, all of a sudden you might be talking about a top 10 level defense in the NFL.
John, everybody or a lot of Eagles fans go back to that tandem of Sheldon Brown and Lito Shepherd when they talk about the corner position. Did the Eagles take that position for granted, and was their method of trying to find replacements like Mike talked about, was that thinking and logic flawed?
Well, I mean, hindsight said it was flawed, but I don't think they took it for granted. As Mike ran down the list, they tried time and time again. Now, you could say there is sort of Band-Aids in there, like Bradley Fletcher, versus attempts at getting, Byron Maxwell was the top cornerback in free agency, not just rated by the Eagles, but everybody. And it just didn't work out. And then you have people in between like Williams would be. So they've tried. It just hasn't worked out for a number of reasons. I mean, if you go back to the Chip Kelly, Bill Davis era, you could argue that, name your pick, Darrelle Revis in his prime and Richard Sherman in his prime, they're probably not going to hold up in that kind of system and that kind of scheme. So that adds to it as well. Now that you're in a more traditional NFL environment, you hope things start to shift in the other direction. And I think the Eagles, I mentioned earlier in the week, I think it's ironic that they have really good safeties, but they don't have the heir apparent at that position. And they might have really good heir apparents at cornerback that aren't ready to play now, and they don't have the guys who are ready to play at a high level. So it's sort of a catch-22 in the secondary as a whole, where you have guys you have to hope really hit the ground running, and that's Douglas and Sidney Jones whenever he's healthy.
Yeah, I saw some stat that said that when the Eagles took two corners in this last draft that we were all at in Philadelphia, that it was the first time that they had taken two corners. The stat had something to do with, like, in the previous 14 seasons combined, like they had taken one and then they took another one. But the corner was not a position that they looked to replenish through the draft. They always tried to go for the Band-Aid move.
Yeah, and well, I kind of take exception with Band-Aid, because if you look at Asamoah and Maxwell specifically, those aren't Band-Aids. Those were high-impact free agency signings that didn't work out. Now, you could argue guys like Fletcher is certainly a Band-Aid type move, and Patrick Robinson, for that matter, is a Band-Aid type move. So I think you have to look at each particular signing. But the two big implosions, when you went out there and expected Asamoah and Maxwell to be high-level cornerbacks, and you were wrong. I mean, there's no way to spin that in a positive direction. Neither of them worked out, although, talk to people in Miami, and they like Byron Maxwell. And the people in Seattle certainly liked him. So that's why I brought up the way Chip Kelly ran his ship and Bill Davis and the way the Eagles ran that defense. Maybe the reality is nobody could succeed at a high level playing in that type of environment.
Talk with John McMullen, 97.3 ESPN.com. Another area that would be, I guess, a disaster, John, would be if one of the safeties got hurt.
Yeah, they don't have a ton of depth at the safety position, and they really don't have a ton of depth at linebacker as well, so that back seven as a whole. Although Terrence Brooks, had some moments in off-season work, I think he kind of stood out. And I believe as training camp begins and the veterans will get in later in the week, obviously, we'll see how it shakes out. I kind of get the feeling he's surpassed Jalen Watkins as that third safety, at least to start. But it doesn't matter who it is. If either of those two guys, Malcolm Jenkins, Rodney McLeod, go down, you're going to have a significant, dissension in play. There's no question about that. But while I say that, I don't think that differs all that much from most of the league. If you look around, everybody has problems with depth. So the Eagles are not an anomaly. That's just a reality in today's NFL. You need to stay healthy.
John, one other area is the linebacker spot. Somebody texted in about, I know Jordan Hicks, but I don't know the names of anybody else. You've kind of hinted that Bradham could be possibly suspended, but after that, we know there's a big drop-off at the linebacker spot. But do you think Michael Kendricks could handle the job if let's say Bradham was out for the year and Kendricks had to be the guy? Is his career salvageable, or is he just at this point not a fit?
I don't think he's a fit here, but I'll just say this about Michael Kendricks. He's an NFL player. I think he needs a change of scenery. If he goes somewhere else, maybe he gets his career back on track. But I will say what we just mentioned at safety. If Nigel or Jordan were to go down, I think the Eagles would be much more comfortable inserting Michael Kendricks than they would be having to insert Terrence Brooks, say, or Jalen Watkins at safety. So I think he's competent. I think in actual, he probably played better the more repetitions. I think one of his issues is that he plays so little, sort of like a pinch hitter in baseball or somebody who doesn't get enough minutes in the NBA. He struggles for a lot of that because he's barely on the field. And I think if he was out there, you'd see an increase in his level of play. So I think they have solid depth up to Michael Kendricks, but after that, it falls off the table.
John McMullen with us here on the Sports Bash, our Eagles insider for 97.3 ESPN, a national columnist for FanRagSports.com. So, John, Mike told you that his name, Josh picked Lane Johnson. I picked Jason Kelce as the guy. What would you think to either of those two choices as being guys that maybe fly a little under the radar but could be critical to the outcome of the Eagles season?
Well, I think in that case, I mean, Lane is a given, except for the suspension issues. If he's on the field, he's going to be one of the 2 or 3 best right tackles in football. Simple as that. You don't have to worry about the standard of play with Lane Johnson. I think more so with Jason Kelce. I mean, which Jason Kelce are you getting? The guy who was really, really bad the first 5 or 6 games of last season, or the guy who came on in December and played really, really well. So I think he would have more of an impact as a wild card because you sort of don't know what Jason Kelce you're going to get. And if you get the good one, well, I think all of a sudden that Pro Football Focus talk of being the best offensive line in football might be closer to being a reality. If you get the bad Jason Kelce, you're probably talking about a good, above-average offensive line, but nothing more than that. So I think from that wild card standpoint, Kelce's more important than Lane because you know what Lane is. Lane's issues are staying on the field and staying away from tainted supplements, which I know Josh will roll his eyes at. But that's, Lane's Lane. He's gonna play at a high level.
The eyes did roll there. Another name that Mike actually brought up, like as a secondary name. I know he went with Jalen Mills first and foremost, but he also thought Torrey Smith. And you say, which guy are you going to get? Are you going to get the good Torrey Smith, or are you going to get the bad Torrey Smith?
Yeah, that's another one because the Torrey Smith in San Francisco last year was really, really bad, and that is taking into account the poor team, the poor quarterback play. He was a part of that, and not because of the poor quarterback play. He just did not play well. And I think the hope is he sort of fell into a funk because of how bad things were around him. And I think he's going to be asked to be a situational player here and do what he does best, which is stretch the field, and he can still run. I think people expecting Torrey Smith to be a 60, 70 catch guy, they're going to be disappointed because that's not going to be his role. The volume is going to go to Alshon Jeffrey and Zach Ertz and Jordan Matthews. Those are the volume guys. It's Torrey Smith's job to sort of clear out the underneath routes for those guys and scare the top to top on the defense. That's his job, and that's what he should be able to excel at. And I think that's how the Eagles look at it. So, as I said, if you're looking for volume, look elsewhere, but he needs to stretch the football field.
Well, and you're in the ballpark there. We had a text message that came in, and the person said Jordan Matthews was their choice as who might be under the radar but have a big impact on the season. I know you spoke a little bit about him there, but is Jordan Matthews a name that you could see?
I think Jordan Matthews is interesting for so many ways because he could be a star player on this offense, and I could also see him traded if the Eagles have desperation at another position. I mean, that's how things could sort of gesticulate for Jordan Matthews this year. And a lot of it depends on Nelson Aguilar and how well he played in training camp. Because if the Eagles start to think he's gotten over the mental humps, because athletically he's certainly gifted, and he looked like a duck to water when it came to taking the slot position when Jordan was hurt in off-season work. So I think a lot of it depends on Nelson Aguilar, but if it's the status quo and Jordan Matthews is going to be the slot receiver, and that's the odds are that's going to be what it is, he's going to be what he always is. And that's the word I mentioned before. He's a volume guy. He's going to catch a lot of footballs.
I'm talking with John McMullen, 97.3 ESPN.com. I know training camp on Monday, the rookies, selected veterans in there. One guy, Pumphrey, I'm interested to see what his role might be because LeGarrette Blount, do you think he's a guy that they want to hand the ball off to 250, 300 times?
I hope so. I doubt it. I would say it's more in the 220 range if he's healthy. But, yeah, I mean, they want him to be the bell cow back. The question really reverts to Doug Peterson and what he wants to do. And he's paid lip service to taking sort of some of the work off Carson Wentz's plate, which he has to. I don't want to see him dropping back 600-plus times again. And for the Eagles to be comfortable with that, they have to develop a solid running game, and that starts with LeGarrette Blount. But, hey, we all know Andy Reid, and we all know Doug Peterson comes from the Andy Reid coaching tree, and they like to throw the football. They default to throwing the football. So I think it's more of, does Doug want to run it? And if he does want to run it, LeGarrette's going to be the guy. I mean, Donnell Pumphrey's not going to be taking touches away from LeGarrette Blount running the football. He's more of a situational guy. And, are they going to get him on the field on third downs with Darren Sproles and some unique formations? But as far as being the bell cow, I mean, that's LeGarrette Blount. And if anything happens to LeGarrette Blount, it's going to be Sproles or Wendell Smallwood stepping up.
Should be a fun Monday to get out there and see Carson Wentz in his second training camp here. As we know, there's a lot of new weapons for him, a lot of new toys. We'll see how much he has developed in this year number 2. The Eagles open up camp on Monday here on the Sports Bash. We'll have plenty more on that. Let's get some quick NFL hits, news and notes here on the Sports Bash. We got, Des Bryant. He's stepping up for his man Ezekiel Elliott here, thinking the troubles are a stepping stone for him. He should be okay. But apparently the league is, the Elliott stuff has kind of got pushed to the side, so the league is going to kind of back off, at least for the weekend here. Do you anticipate Elliott, though, still getting some games suspended?
I do. If you saw what happened with Adam Jones today, he got the 1-game suspension. I think it's going to be something similar to that one. I couldn't imagine it being more than a 2-game suspension. People were speculating today because it's the classic NFL Friday news dump. They did it with Jones, and they love doing that. I don't know why, because things have changed so much. You're not fooling anybody, but it looks like camp is going to start. They finished the investigation. They've informed the NFLPA. The NFLPA has answered any questions, and now we're just waiting for Roger Goodell to rule. But the whispers around this league for a couple months now is he's probably going to get a game or 2.
We'll see.
And by the way, the Cowboys are working out running backs, which could be also an indication.
Well, that's
that
interesting news. Ronnie Hillman?
Yeah, Ronnie Hillman, and I forget, they had somebody else in there as well, another third down back. So it's not, I mean,
that was Denard Robinson, the other one.
Denard Robinson, former Jacksonville, former Michigan player. But
yeah, it looks like Anquan Bolden is going to visit the Bills on Monday. Anquan Bolden.
Yeah, and they need help at the receiver position. It's every year. Bolden is so old, obviously. It's tough to give him a 2 or 3 year contract at this point. But he goes, whether it's Detroit, whether it's Baltimore, he goes in late and he ends up being one of the 2 or 3 best receivers on the team. And the same thing will happen if he signs in Buffalo.
Yeah.
He can play. And he's never been a speed guy. So it's one of those things where it really doesn't matter if he's lost a step because he's just so smart and savvy as a slot receiver and strong. He could just beat up cornerbacks and sort of play a game of basketball on turf and just block them out and catch the football. He'd be a huge improvement for that team.
And I know Kyle Fuller is a guy you've mentioned a lot. I saw a lot of people out there think he could be on the outside looking in on a roster spot. So as training camp gets here, you got to start keeping your eyes peeled for veterans like that who the Eagles might have some interest in.
Yeah, I mean, as you cut down to 53, everybody breathes a sigh of relief. But, often you're going to pick up guys on waivers. So that first cut to 53 is not necessarily he's going to be there week 1. And obviously, if you look at this team, the most likely spot for them to pick up somebody on waivers is going to be at the cornerback position. And that's not going to change throughout this entire month of training camp. The Eagles, and remember that the one cut down was removed, so it's going to be 90 to 53, nothing in between. And the Eagles scouts are going to be busy.
It's a big gap.
Piling through those names. Yeah. It's a huge cut, and there's going to be a lot of names on the street, and I guarantee there's going to be guys who can help this football team.
John McMullen, he'll be at Eagles Camp Monday. Sports Bash Live, 97.3 ESPN. We'll have it all covered for you here. And the NFL at FanRag Sports NFL. Check out John on Twitter at JF McMullen. And, of course, John, have a good weekend, man, as the football season is officially here.
The grind begins. Enjoy the heat over the weekend, boys.